Today on the Workplace Makers podcast, we talk about a key aspect of understanding the workforce in understanding the diversity and the variation that happens when people work in a hybrid way. So we've taken people from being co-located, same time, same place, and now there's a huge diversity and huge complexity in how we manage and in how we manage our workplaces, and firstly, how we need to understand them to be able to manage them. So I talked with Jessica Hall. I'm thrilled to introduce her, a really insightful tool that helps employers to get their head around that diversity and know how to manage their hybrid workplace. Today on the Workplace Makers podcast, I am joined by Jessica Hall, and Jessica is the co-creator and head of Worksona, which is the first Australian workspace analytics tool of its kind, and that puts her at the forefront of the hybrid workplace revolution. So it's fantastic to have her on the show. Jessica, which do you prefer, Jessica?
Yes, it's great.
Yes, it's great. Jess applies quite specialized expertise actually in the area of organizational culture change. Hybrid has unique challenges. And so she's in that space of culture change, hybrid work models, and people analytics. And today we're going to be talking about Worksona, because Worksona has identified 5 unique personas that represent a new generation of employees. And this work has really established the data for organizations and can establish the data for unique organizations to design their right hybrid workplace solution for their unique workforce mix. So it's exciting to be talking about this tool, and I'd love to, find out more about that. But first, let's find out about you and how you got into organizational psychology. So what got you interested? What was the trigger or the thing where you thought, oh, that's where I want to go and spend my time?
Yeah, I think I'm one of those people who, hear that these days people have 5 careers, and I think I'm becoming one of those people. But I originally studied media and communications, worked in PR, went back, did psychology, worked in clinical and forensic psychology. But then I really realised it was, and I've always been interested in what makes people tick and the way they behave, but particularly fascinated by what makes a good leader and what makes a great workplace, and that they're really hard to pinpoint culture. So that's what drew me to organizational psychology.
So it sounds like you love a complex challenge.
Yes, I could say that. Yeah.
Media, PR, comms, organizational leadership and cultural change. Yeah, quite a nice complex mix there. And so what's a common stereotype about organizational psychologists? Do you find that there's a myth people hold around the role where they think they're getting one thing, and actually you really wish that everyone understood that it's something else?
Not sure about a common stereotype, but I do think that organizational psychologists aren't well understood. We could be better understood, and in terms of the value that we can bring. I think that what people discover after working with us is particularly the evidence-based approach, that richness that we can bring in terms of understanding how to incorporate evidence-based research, and that really we're really trained to understand human behaviour and long-held theories around that, integrating that into the work we do. I think that's probably our biggest differentiator.
And that's something that a lot of people are constantly struggling with each day, is how do I understand how the people around me are going to behave, or how do I understand how my workforce is going to behave, and what on earth is where did that behavior come from?
Yeah, so, what's driving it? And I think as humans in general, we're not well at understanding our own behavior, let alone other people. So and partly that's what drove the creation of Worksona too, is to understand the behaviors behind motivations and preferences and things.
And so tell us about Worksona. What is the main problem that you're solving with Worksona? How does it help an employer?
Well, Worksona is our suite of tools and services designed specifically for the hybrid world. And I guess it was born from the need for leaders to understand their workforce again. Because, I mean, over the past 2 or 3 years, there's been a lot of change, as we all know, and the way people work has fundamentally changed, and the things that they want from work has changed, and along with that, culture changes, and so it's a really pivotal point for the leaders to get to know their workforce again and to see how they have changed, and because without it, you're sort of flying blind. And we're facing a really complex world of work, much more complex than it's been in the past. So it was behind WorkSona is really just to try and decode some of these complex things that are happening.
Great. And the core is personas. And so I love that amalgamation of the words, workplace or workforce and personas to get WorkSona. That's quite clever. And so before I worked in flexible workplace design or came across human-centered design, I heard the word persona and I thought it meant a version of yourself that you adopt for different circumstances. So a mask or a facade that is adapting to the demands of the situation. But let's hear it from you. What is your view of personas? What do you mean by persona?
Sure, and you're right, the persona diagnostic is our key tool that underpins a lot of the work and the services we offer in WorkSona. I guess the way we think of personas is it's more of a sort of a cluster of characteristics or a working style or a group of preferences. So we found through our research that there were these clusters, and they're quite distinct clusters that came out consistently through the data that really differentiated other employees from each other. So that's how we're using the concept of personas.
And so can you give us an example of what one of the personas might be so we could visualize how that looks in operation? How we might be able to imagine someone that we've met, or people in our workplaces who might fit this description.
Yeah, sure. I guess the key thing to remember about our personas is that the clusters, the characteristics that we've pulled out are the things that differentiate them from other groups of employees. So there's usually quite a lot of overlap between employees. For example, if you ask someone what their most critical work activity is, almost regardless of your role, people will say collaborating within my team. So it's not those things we're interested in, it's things that are quite different. So and it's not that each persona doesn't do these things necessarily either, it's just that not to the same degree, the same strength. So that's kind of the underlying concept behind our personas. So the 5 personas, they are connectors, adapters, nesters, stoics, and nomads. And I guess maybe I'll run briefly through them all, if that's okay, because they are points of reference for each other. So I'll start with the connectors. So the 3 biggest groups are the connectors, the nesters, and the stoics. The connectors are the people who typically really enjoy working in the office. They love that face-to-face interaction. They really thrive on the in-person environment and the vibe in the office. That's how they like to collaborate and share information, and they're very comfortable doing that. They tend, in our research, they've got self-reported less confidence in their digital skills, and that impacts their remote experience, and they tend to rate their remote experience as quite negative. They're detractors from the NPS scores of the remote experience. So it's sort of a number of things driving that office attendance. They also tend to have shorter commutes, and they tend not to have a setup at home that facilitates a nice working environment. So and the other important thing is that they're really strong on the boundaries between work and personal lives. And as we all know, working from home, that can start to get a bit blurry. So,
living at work very quickly. Yes, if you don't have
yes.
boundaries in place. Yeah.
And in almost complete contrast are the nesters, and they're actually the biggest group that we found throughout our research, 44%. And I should say, though, that refers to our research only applied to knowledge workers, so desk-based people, not to frontline workers and so forth. But nesters represent 44%, and they have a much stronger preference to work from home. And not just from home, but they're more likely to have a private office at home. So a private space or a private office. And not only do they feel more productive, they're more comfortable, they actually feel more connected to their colleagues, interacting virtually than they do in the office. And that's where they feel they do their best work. They're very tech savvy, they're really confident digitally, they feel they feel just as connected, they feel the culture can be transmitted virtually just the same as it can in the office. And in contrast to connectors, they don't thrive on that in-person office environment. So quite different. Then we have our stoics, and they tend to work from home, but they have a preference to work more from the office. And it is interesting. And the reasons for them working at home are quite kind of hard to understand, because they don't rate the office highly in terms of the office experience, but they also don't rate their environment at home highly. So they're kind of equally dissatisfied with both settings. They tend to be lower engagement scores, which could perhaps account for some of their dissatisfaction as well. They don't feel they have the tools and technology to collaborate from anywhere, but at the same time, they don't feel the office is geared up to do that in a superior way either. So they're generally sort of ambivalent and unsatisfied.
Looking for something that they don't actually have access to, potentially looking for a solution that doesn't exist in their world at that point in time, potentially.
Yes, yeah. And and I think it's just personal circumstances that they choose to work from home. It suits their routine, and it saves time and commuting and so forth. But whereas the nesters really thrive in that environment, and that's their strong preference. That's not the case with stoics. And and unfortunately, they represent 20% of the workforce, so they're a big chunk of people to consider.
That's number. When you think about the number it takes to influence the the attitude, the cultural atmosphere, the vibe of the place. If you've got 1 in 5 people generally dissatisfied with their ways of working, then that, and where they work, that's a significant, that has quite a significant effect on a team potentially.
Yeah, it really does. And I guess for us, though, it's sort of exciting too, because that does represent a group of people that are ripe for change and to find a solution that does suit them better.
Right.
And sorry, I should have mentioned too that the reason, one of the motivations that we discovered for them wanting to work in the office more is they feel that will help them in their career and show that they're working hard. Yeah. So that sort of speaks to a culture that isn't quite ready for hybrid and remote working, where it sort of doesn't have the trust and sort of inbuilt. So that's also something to consider if you were to get a composition for your workforce that had a high number of stoics. That's probably something you investigate.
Great. And there's two more.
Two more, yes, the adapters. So they're quite similar to the connectors in that their preferred workspace is the office. They also thrive on that in-person, face-to-face interaction. The difference is they feel an expectation to work in the office, whereas connectors don't. Connectors are purely there by choice, whereas adapters feel that either their team or their manager expects them to be there. And interestingly, they were the only persona that had that were in favour of mandating the number of days people can work remotely. And also interestingly, they, for their role, critical activities include large group meetings, unplanned informal meetings and client-facing activities. So, and there was a tiny, I mean, not enough to put it into the research, but there was a weak correlation that they were more likely to be in senior management positions, which sort of fits with that profile. But yeah, there's sort of a different take on the connectors.
Yeah, that's such a distinct group, isn't it? So the way they could see, they're looking for clarity from the organization, that mandate, potentially, really responding to the policy, really responding to their environment, as the core of what's driving their behavior.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, exactly that. And they're a smaller group. They're about 15% in our research.
And these numbers are across the original data set that you worked with, and
that's right.
And where you came up from, where that data came from is how the personas were originated.
Yeah, that's right. We did a big data collection phase late last year, and that we collected over 1,000 responses from all sorts of industries and different types of organisations. We had media, professional services, finance, quite a diverse range. And I think all up we had 250,000 data points. So awesome. So we were happy with the sample size. It gave us confidence that we could draw some reliable conclusions.
Nice. And tell us about the Nomads. Tell us.
So the Nomads, yes, they're only a small group, 5%, and quite unique. They work remotely, but never from their home. So from different locations, such as clients' offices or other remote co-working spaces or cafes on the road, etc. They feel they don't have the flexibility to choose how they work, which was an interesting distinction. And similar to nesters in a way, they don't particularly enjoy that office energy, and they don't tend to crave those office-based connections with their colleagues. So it could be that it's a function of their role that they need to travel a lot, and so that's why they don't feel they have that flexibility.
Yeah, interesting how sometimes people can gravitate to a role that enables them to have the lifestyle, the work style that suits them best. It's there's no it'd be really interesting to see what the correlation is there between people's preferences around stability in their home life, for example, or nomadism in their home life and nomadism in their work life. But now we're only talking about the 5%. So if we were to do something really useful in an organization, we could actually understand the proportion and the ratio of each of these personas in a workforce. And so how does it play out when you take that persona tool and see how it plays out? How does it play out in a variety of different organizations and industries? Do you see that those same proportions in terms of the 44% nesters, the 5% nomads? Do you tend to see those same numbers across organizations, or how does it work?
Yeah, so we've actually been blown away by the diversity. We had predictions for certain industries, and before running it with particular organizations, everybody sort of has an idea of what they think their results will be. And in some cases that has aligned to their expectations, but in other cases it's just completely different, which I think sort of highlights this need to understand people again, to really sort of check in and how have you changed, how's your working changed. And we've actually found no pattern across industries. So yeah, in fact, we've had two media organisations who are quite similar in size, similar in their roles, perform similar types of roles, and they're completely different composition. So I think that's the power in the persona diagnostic, is it's specific to your unique workforce. And whereas you might think you're safe to say that you've got a similar composition to a competitor, in fact, whether or not it's the culture or the leadership or what's influencing that, they completely different compositions. And so off the back of that, you design completely different interventions. and different hybrid work policies based off their composition.
How quickly do you think a workforce composition would change? Do you think that you could do worksona or do look at personas again in 3 years' time and it might be quite different? Or do you think that, because it sounds like there's individual variation and then there's going to be people leaving, coming and going, and that will change the composition as well. So what drives the change in personas, in change in composition?
Yeah, and we're actually really excited by that idea, and we will run another data collection phase to see how things have changed. And even on an organisation level, ideally you'd run worksona to understand firstly as a discovery phase, and then you develop your strategy, your hybrid work model, various interventions, and then rerun worksona to see the impact of those and to see how the composition has changed and how the different motivations and the different ways of working have adapted over time. And I think we'll see, I think the personas are a result of sort of just really basic individual preferences and logistics, but also the overlay of culture, the technology available, the type of work being done, the leadership style. So that kind of melding of things will, I think we're about to see a lot of change as we're kind of stabilizing back into this new normal. So a change in the approaches that organizations take. So I think that will be reflected in the personas, but we'll have to wait and see. But it's something we're excited about.
And that's where you can see, when you think about leadership style, you think about logistics, you think about technology people have access to, think about their home setup, think about their personal preferences, whether they've moved closer to the office, whether they're further away from the office. As those things change, I guess that's how you end up with two completely different pictures into very similar organizations otherwise. So it's
that's right.
Point, isn't it, that we can't make assumptions, because I think one of the things I come across is that people can look at another industry, a peer or an industry standard, for example, feel like there's it's not an ISO standard, but they would feel like there's a way that we do things in our industry in terms of workstation ratio, for example, one of those key features of a hybrid workplace. Do you have any comment on that, I guess, because when it comes to that space provision and what those work settings are, these are going to be things that people are looking for. Connectors will be looking for a certain feature in the environment. Nomads will be looking for the flexibility to go elsewhere, and nesters will potentially want support for their home office if they haven't already got that. So
that's right. And the office, it might be used less, but I think it plays an even more critical role these days. And you're right, the different personas require different things from the office. They're motivated by different things to come into the office, and they want to use it differently. Having said that, the key to hybrid working is trying to find this delicate balance between individual preferences and what's best for the team, what's best for clients and the organisation. So it can't always be about individual preferences, but by trying to find that ideal balance is part of the challenge. And talking about space and real estate footprints and configurations and things, I was a panelist yesterday at an event, and there was someone from Mirvac there, and they've created this thing called the adaptive workplace, and basically it's a floor in one of their buildings where they've got hackable furniture and setups, and they're reconfiguring it based on the team that comes through. And each team had a completely different style, but what was probably most interesting is before going in, they thought that they'd need the office set up in a particular way. For example, when finance came in, they said they really needed work points and 2 monitors, and that was important. They needed quiet focus time. By the end of the first week, they said, no, we want the monitors taken away. We need more collaboration spaces. And they also had sensors to measure the hot and cold zones in the space. And so the way they used it was actually quite different to how they expected to use it. So I think the key takeaway is to experiment and to kind of, we don't know what the perfect configuration of the office is yet, but to be as adaptable as we can, and experiment with different ways and keep the space as versatile as possible.
I really hear you on that point around hybrid is a delicate balance.
Yes.
And I do see a number of employers experimenting, which is fantastic, with ways that they can work, with policy settings, with guidelines, and a number of other employers are really trying to tie this down and have it sorted, and have one view that's going to take them forward into this new normal. So yeah, what's your take on that? Do you feel that there's there's a need to experiment, and there's a need to to get that? How do people get to that right delicate balance?
Yeah, and I mean, we're all trying to figure that out. I guess that's what we're all trying to do. And I think we're at sort of, the very first version of hybrid working, and it's going to continue to evolve for, many years. So we've got a long way to go, but I think experimentation and being open to new ways of doing things is really key. And listening to your people, I think, is really important too. And to try and meet them halfway. And I mean, I know we've seen people like Elon Musk and things mandating, in the press recently, mandating people back in the office. But I think all of the research has shown that's not a wise move, especially in this sort of talent scarce market at the moment. And I mean,
follow, hey, like not an example that we would recommend.
No, he wouldn't
follow.
No, that's right.
Yeah,
I mean,
unless you're in I think his situation's interesting in that he's in essentially a monopoly position as the owner of Tesla, and that there isn't a brand similar to it. There's no, there's no company that's going to have the same cachet on your CV. If you can put Tesla on your CV, that really is being at the top of your game. So he's in that position where he can just tell people, what he wants, and he'll probably still have a good number of people working for him. I saw some research from Nicholas Bloom, who's done he did the first really robust study on work from home and productivity around work from home way back in 2012, keeps getting quoted. And he said his data showed that only 10% of people would actually leave as a result of that. 30% would come back but would be thinking about leaving, and 60% would just stay. And so I thought that was fascinating, that we would probably like to think that Elon Musk will really suffer as a result of that, but but actually he might only experience a 10% loss. And still, I think that's a huge corporate knowledge loss. And that's a significant hit to a company that's looking to be really innovative and cutting edge. So
I think more importantly is that 30% that you mentioned that are still there, but they're not committed, and they've got their eye open for something else. And I mean, he's operating from a position of power. He probably can get away with it. And I mean, the pendulum may swing back towards employers later in the year with the economic downturn and so forth. But I mean, I don't enjoy that kind of conversation and that way of thinking about things. I mean, I'd hope that most employers are actually more geared to think about how can I get the best out of my people, and the best way to do that is what's best for them, and working together, and not what can I get away with forcing people to do.
Yes.
So
this is sorry, I'll let you finish your thought.
And I was just thinking, I mean, if especially when it comes to the best talent. So if you're after the best talent, really that's where you need to be your beginning point, not what can I enforce. And I mean, if it is, sorry, when we're just talking about that delicate balance, and I do think that there's definitely scope for organisations to think carefully about what really matters to them, and what things do need to be performed in person and face to face. And if you can communicate that value and the intention behind that, and you set it up in a way that when people come in the office to do those things, it can be performed well. I think that's completely reasonable, and most people feel quite open to that. And so I think although mandates aren't wise, and this obsession with kind of talking about how many days in the office, I don't think that's helpful, but to have guidelines in place, for example, the key activities that we want, our way of doing things is that that's done in person, and then other things can be done either, and other things are happy to be done virtually, etc. I think that's really helpful for people, and you can have deal breakers for organisations to say, no, we have a strong stance on this, onboarding or client kickoff meetings, relationship building. We want that in person, and but having people giving their employees the sort of the trust and the flexibility to make those judgment calls in the broader scheme of things. Yeah.
And it would be good if we could just to dig a little bit deeper into this, what's at stake around trust and engagement. I think it's again something that people really struggle to understand. We're looking at human behavior. We're trying to understand where would people be motivated to be, what can we expect from our workforce going forward. And I think that question around how bad is it, if we're not actually suiting the workplace to people's preferences, what does it do really in terms of engagement and trust, and any other factors that we might think are important: productivity, well-being, stress. What's your take on that? What are you seeing with employers?
Well, just actually something that came out of our own research, which we were blown away with, and something we didn't expect, was included in in one of our diagnostics. We ask a lot of NPS questions, so they're kind of the NPS ratings of the office experience, the remote experience, hybrid experience, the digital experience. But we also ask an employee net promoter score, which is kind of the it's considered as sort of a proxy for overall engagement. So that's the standard question of how likely are you to recommend your employer as a great place to work to family or friends, and it's sort of the holy grail of HR metrics. And so when we looked at our data set, we ran an analysis to see what most strongly predicted positive scores on that NPS result, and what most strongly predicted negative scores. And the things that predicted most positive scores were things that we expected, such as, I feel proud to work for my organisation, I feel valued by my organisation, and my values align with my organisations. And that's kind of, very expected, but quite standard. What we really didn't expect was, out of all the questions that we asked, all the different variables, and I think there's over 50, so including culture and leadership and motivations and preferences, the three items that came out as to predict most strongly negative NPS score, so that's the lower engagement basically, was when I work remotely, my work is scrutinised more closely. When I work remotely, I feel more pressure to respond quickly. And when I work remotely, I need to provide justification for working remotely. So I think what underlines all of those three is trust. So people aren't feeling trusted to work home. They want to work remotely. They feel that they're entitled to work remotely, but we're not feeling trusted, and we're not empowered to do that. And so, I mean, for us, that's the case for getting things right. So if you can't get that hybrid experience right, and you can't get your people feeling trusted and in that setting, then according to our research, it will have the most negative impact on overall engagement, which we know has a dollar value and has a direct impact on retention and the bottom line. So we found that really powerful. So there is a lot at stake.
Incredibly insightful. That's good reason, good segue into just explaining how this is different to a persona view of roamers, zoners, and on the roaders. and homers that we've come across. You might have heard those terms across the last decade. Various organizations have been using those terms to describe the personas in their organization. So how is the WorkSona tool offering something quite different to that?
To be honest, I'm not really across those. I have heard those terms thrown about. I guess I'd be curious to know if they really dig deep into the motivations driving those behaviours, and not just the kind of the insights in terms of where do people prefer to work. It's what's driving that, and then the important thing about our persona diagnostics, you get the persona composition, but there's a whole range of other workplace metrics that we look at. So, for example, those predictions of NPS scores, and if you've got a really low NPS score for hybrid or the office or the remote, then you can dig down into those to see the questions that formed that, to say what's really impacting that result. So what aspects of the office experience aren't ideal, and what's driving those results. So I can't actually speak to that much, but
I think the way we sorry, but yeah, I think that's a really good summary, because there's essentially a grouping of preferences in that Romers, Zoners, on the rotors and homers that it's essentially around behavior, what behavior we see them doing, but what we're understanding from WorkSona is more around motivations, preferences, things that are going to drive future behavior, and ways that an organization could interact with people to potentially change their behavior in the direction that is productive and profitable.
That's right, and it really teases out the experience. So the experience in the human, the digital, and the physical experience. So the physical experience of the workplace remotely and in the office. So when you tease out each of those elements of the experience, then you really start to uncover some of the nuance in what's driving the behaviour.
Yeah. Thanks, Jess. I have one last question for you, unless there's anything that you wanted to add, and I'll create space for that as well. But tell us, we're all humans at the end of the day, and workplace connection opportunities are a really valid way of bringing teams together. So I like to think that we're kind of getting together around a meal in our podcast. So what is your favorite meal? What would you bring to a team get together? And why?
Oh God, no, I have to admit that I'm a terrible cook. Oh God, I would buy something. I have to just cop to that. I would absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I do know the good places to go in my area, and
right.
Yes, I've got a good selection.
That would absolutely work. Yeah, brilliant. Look, thank you so much. Is there anything you wanted to add before we sign off?
No, I think it's been a really interesting discussion, and thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. I think we've delved into the value of our workforce, and it's really exciting to know that we've got a tool like this available. And I think to be able to see how it links together those key aspects of hybrid. We've got the logistics and the physical aspects of the space, right down to people's homes and their travel, and then you've got the very human aspect of how we're working and how teams are working, and how effective people feel that is, and whether it's working for them. So I'm excited by the tool. I think it's offering something that's really needed right now. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Pleasure. Thanks so much.
Yeah.